Welcome back to Threads of Truth, where real-life mysteries meet internet speculation.
Good to be back.
Ready for this one? It's one of those cases that really gets under your skin.
It really is. I've been thinking about this one a lot. This isn't just a missing person case. It feels more like a narrative haunting.
A narrative haunting, that's the perfect way to put it, because today we're going to examine the vanishing of Keith Reinhard in 1988.
Mm-hmm.
And our sources really paint this picture of Silver Plume, Colorado. You look at photos and it's this old silver mining town high up in the Rockies. It just feels still, like time doesn't really move there.
That stillness is so important to the story. It's tiny, it's isolated, about 70 miles west of Denver, just kind of nestled in the mountains. It's the perfect stage for a mystery like this.
And Keith Reinhard, who was 50 years old at the time, just walks out of this setting in August of '88.
He walks out and he disappears.
What makes this so unique and why we're exploring it today is I guess you'd call it a chilling synchronicity. It's like he was following a path that was already there.
A path laid out by someone else's tragedy, yes.
And he leaves behind this fictional world, this novel he was writing, that was almost a blueprint for his own disappearance.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And you have this unnerving fact that despite a huge search, one of the biggest Colorado had ever seen at the time, they found nothing.
Nothing at all.
Not a single clue, not a shred of clothing, not a footprint, nothing.
Yeah.
Keith Reinhard managed a completely clean disappearance into the wilderness.
That complete absence of evidence is really where we have to start. So let's walk through what brought him to this place to begin with. What was his life like before Silver Plume?
Well, before all this, Keith Reinhard was a man of routine, a dedicated professional. The source materials are clear on this. For 22 years, he was a sports writer for the Daily Herald in Algonquin, Illinois.
22 years.
Yeah, a long time. He specialized in high school sports, which is a steady, community-focused job. You have to be consistent.
So he wasn't some lifelong wanderer always looking for the next adventure. He had very deep roots.
He was rooted, yes, but there are also these hints of a quiet restlessness. In the summer of 1988, he's 50, and he makes this huge change. He takes a 90-day leave of absence from his job.
A sabbatical.
He called it a creative sabbatical. His goal, in his own words, was to work, write, reflect, and regenerate in the mountains.
So this wasn't just a vacation.
Not at all. It was a deliberate quest for something, some kind of personal renewal.
And he leaves his wife of 3 years behind in Illinois to do this. That decision alone tells you something pretty profound was going on inside him. A need to kind of redefine himself.
It really does. It speaks to this deep motivation that was more than just needing a break. He saw himself as a free spirit, He was into things like landscape photography and gold panning, activities that put him out there alone in nature.
And Silver Plume was supposed to be the place where he could do all that and, most importantly, write his novel.
Right. That was the centerpiece of the whole sabbatical.
So tell me about his setup there. It doesn't sound like he was living in luxury.
Oh, far from it. He really embraced this kind of ascetic, stripped-down existence. He rented a really small apartment in the back of an old, abandoned Catholic church.
Wow.
And this is the key to the whole story. He also rented a small shop space in town. The idea was to sell some of his matted photographs, make a little money. But the real work, the real focus was on that manuscript.
And just so you can get a picture of him, the sources describe Keith as a big guy, 6'2", around 210 pounds, graying hair, blue eyes.
Physically imposing.
Which you'd think would make him harder to lose. He's not a small person who could just blend into the undergrowth.
Absolutely. His physical presence makes the fact that they found nothing even more baffling.
Yeah.
But it's that shop space he rented. That's the absolute center of this whole mystery.
Because it had a history.
It had a very dark, very specific history.
This is where that synchronicity you mentioned comes in. Keith rented the exact same building that was occupied the year before by a bookstore owner named Tom Young.
Yes. And Tom Young's story is this unsettling prelude to Keith's. Because Tom Young also disappeared back in 1987.
And how did he disappear?
He walked into the mountains with his dog and just vanished. No trace. Eerily similar to what Keith would end up writing for his own character.
That's already incredibly strange. To choose, of all the places, the one with this unsolved mystery attached to it, but the timing of what happened next is It's just astronomical.
It is the single most haunting detail in this case, I think. Tom Young had been missing for almost exactly a year. Then, on July 31st, 1988.
Okay, let me get the date straight. July 31st.
Right. And on that day, Tom Young's remains and his dogs were found by some hunters out in the wilderness there.
And this was precisely 1 week before Keith Reinhard disappeared.
Precisely 1 week to the day.
Wow. Okay, so Tom Young's body is found. What did they say happened to him?
Well, the official investigation concluded, and the cause of death was ruled as suicide, a self-inflicted gunshot wound to the head. But the source materials are very clear about this. The tight-knit community in Silver Plume was extremely skeptical. A lot of people suspected foul play, or at the very least, they felt the investigation was rushed, inadequate.
And Keith, this investigative writer who came out there looking for a story, suddenly has the biggest story of his life fall right into his lap.
He became utterly consumed by it. He saw Tom Young's story, the vanishing, the weird circumstances, the local doubt, and a perfect hook for his novel.
So he starts digging.
He does. He's talking to locals, asking questions, trying to piece together what really happened to Tom Young. He's basically becoming an amateur detective to fuel his own fiction.
So you've got this man totally immersed in a story about another man who walked into the mountains, whose body was just found, whose death is suspicious, and all of this leads up to August 7th, 1988. What was his state of mind that day?
His actions that Sunday afternoon were, well, they were deeply impulsive.
Yeah.
And they contradicted everything known about his character. Around 5 o'clock in the evening, he just announces he's going for what he called a brief hike.
A brief hike.
And his stated goal was to summit Pendleton Mountain, a peak that's over 12,500 feet.
Okay, wait. 5 p.m. in August in the high Rockies, that's when things start to turn. The sun's going down, storms can roll in out of nowhere, the temperature drops fast. That is not the time to start a major hike.
Not at all. And that's why his preparation, or really the complete lack of it, is the first huge red flag.
Yeah.
It just doesn't point to a serious planned hike.
What was he wearing?
The materials say casual clothes, jeans, maybe a light jacket, and just gym shoes. He had no backpack, no water, no food, and certainly no proper climbing gear for a high-altitude summit.
Climbing a 12,500-foot mountain in sneakers starting at 5 p.m.? That sounds like, well, it's either incredibly reckless or the hike was a cover for something else entirely.
And this brings us to the biggest contradiction of all. His friends, his family, they were all unanimous about this. Keith Reinhard had a lifelong, significant fear of heights.
A fear of height.
A deep-seated phobia, not just mild nerves. So why would a 50-year-old man who is terrified of heights suddenly decide on an impulse to try and summit a massive peak alone late in the day with no gear?
It makes no sense. You look at it as just a hike.
It baffles all logic, yes.
He told people he'd be back by 10 p.m. That deadline came and went.
And the next morning, the search began. The Clear Creek County Sheriff's Office launched a massive operation. They were looking for this big 6'2" man, so they brought in everything: ground teams, dogs, air support.
And the search went on for a full week.
A full week. The effort was just enormous.
And we have to really emphasize the scale of this and the tragic cost. How many man-hours did they log in that search?
In that first week alone, they logged over 10,000 man-hours.
10,000.
It was a Herculean effort for a small county. But the whole investigation has this incredibly heavy, tragic shadow over it that often gets overlooked.
The Civil Air Patrol plane crash.
Yes. During one of the aerial sweeps, one of the search planes went down in that treacherous, rocky terrain.
And the pilot was killed?
The pilot was killed instantly. The spotter on board was seriously injured. A life was lost looking for a man who we still don't know if he was a victim or if he just walked away.
So the search was officially called off on August 14th after a week, having found nothing but that awful secondary tragedy.
The result was a complete zero. No shoe prints, no torn fabric, no sign of a fall. The environment just seemed to swallow him whole. And that vacuum of evidence forces you to stop looking at the physical landscape and start looking at the psychological one, specifically his unfinished novel.
Okay, let's pivot there, because this is where the story goes from a missing person case to something deeper, almost like existential true crime. The unfinished manuscript. What did they find on his computer?
They found a detailed story that was basically a mirror of the local tragedy. The protagonist's name was Guy Connor. And from the descriptions, from the plot notes, Guy Connor was an unmistakable thinly veiled version of Tom Young.
So Keith wasn't just inspired by Tom Young. He was essentially writing his fictional biography, maybe trying to solve his death through the story.
That's certainly one interpretation. He was so immersed in this local mystery that he'd adopted it as his own literary project. But the most disturbing thing they found was the final paragraph, the last thing he wrote before he disappeared.
And that paragraph described an exit.
It was chillingly prophetic. It describes Guy Connor, the Tom Young character, doing this very deliberate final act. He locks up his shop for the last time, and then the character looks up at the mountains and makes this clear, irreversible decision. He's going to walk into them and disappear forever.
Let's sit with that for a second. The author, Keith, writes the final scene for his character, who disappears into the mountains. And then, maybe just hours later, he announces his own impulsive, ill-equipped hike up a mountain and does the exact same thing.
The blurring of the lines between reality and fiction it's almost too perfect. It's too neat.
It forces you to look at what was going on in his head. Was this a case of becoming the character? Does he get so deep into this story of escape and finality, especially after they found Tom Young's body, that the boundary just dissolved?
That's the theory. He came here for regeneration, but the story he chose to write was all about a permanent exit.
And this wasn't a totally new idea for him, was it? There was something he wrote much earlier in his life that pointed in this same direction.
Absolutely. The sources uncovered this deep-seated wanderlust he'd expressed decades before. They found a poem he wrote when he was just a boy.
And it reads,
"Oh God, I want to wander. I want to wander till I die, with the mountains as my living room, my only roof for the sky."
So now we can connect the dots. You have this lifelong romantic idea of ultimate freedom and solitude. Then the shock of the Tom Young discovery gives him a real-world template for it. And finally, his own creative impulse leads him to write the script for his own final act. Does the voluntary disappearance scenario suddenly seem like the most plausible one?
It becomes very compelling. If Keith wanted to achieve the outcome from his poem and his novel to wander till I die, then that strange late afternoon hike provides the perfect public alibi.
Okay, but let's challenge that for a minute. If you wanted to get away clean, why stage a hike up Pendleton Mountain, the highest peak around? Wouldn't that draw the maximum amount of attention?
That's a great point, but I think the logistics actually still favor a voluntary exit. Silver Plume is tiny. Any departure would be noticed. By announcing a dangerous hike up a major peak, he immediately directs all the search efforts into the most hostile and difficult terrain possible.
He's misdirecting the search party.
Exactly. If his real plan was to disappear, he'd only have to walk a short distance out of town, maybe just out of sight. And then he could make his way to the I-70 corridor, which is right there.
And I-70 isn't just some local road. It's the main artery connecting Denver to the entire West Coast.
Correct. It means within hours of leaving Silver Plume, he could have hitched a ride and been hundreds of miles away. The massive, expensive search for him on Pendleton Mountain would have all its resources focused exactly where he was not.
Believing he was a victim of the mountain?
Just like his character. The fact that they found nothing, absolutely nothing, that strongly supports this idea. If he never actually went up the mountain, of course the searchers would find nothing.
There's the other major theory, the one that his own family, his son, champions.
Right. His son, Kai Reinhard, has been very public with his belief that his father was murdered.
And that theory ties right back to the Tom Young case.
It's all connected.
So what's the motive that Kai suggests?
The theory is that Keith wasn't just writing fiction, he was actively investigating. He was looking into the suspicious death of Tom Young, which had just been ruled a suicide, despite all the local doubt. Kai believes that his father, while playing amateur detective for his book, stumbled onto something, some information that proved Tom Young was murdered.
And if someone in that small, isolated town was involved in Tom Young's death, a nosy writer from out of town asking questions would be a huge threat.
A massive threat. If Keith learned something that someone wanted to keep buried, they would have a very powerful motive to silence him. His impulsive hike would have been the perfect opportunity.
They could have intercepted him.
Killed him, and then disposed of his body somewhere completely different, far away from the Pendleton Mountain search grid. In an old mine shaft, maybe. The area is full of them.
So the foul play theory also provides a perfect explanation for the total lack of evidence. A murderer would make sure no trace was left on that mountain, just as much as he would if he'd walked away.
It creates a perfect forensic stalemate. You're left with two completely opposite theories, but both of them rely on the silence of the wilderness to work.
Did he write his own exit, or was he silenced for what he learned? In either case, the mountains are the accomplice.
The ultimate concealer.
Let's explore that a bit. Why are these high-altitude environments so good at erasing people, even now with drones and satellite imagery, things we didn't have in 1988?
The terrain there is it's brutally rugged. This isn't a gentle rolling forest. You're talking about scree fields, steep ravines, dense, dark timber, and huge elevation changes. The verticality alone makes searching almost impossible.
So what are the actual mechanisms that just make evidence disappear?
Well, there are a few key factors. The first is just exposure and weather. Let's say Keith did have an accident. He slipped or got altitude sickness or hypothermia, which happens fast up there. His first instinct would be to find shelter.
Get out of the wind.
Right. Under a rock overhang, in a small cave, a thicket of trees. Once someone is in a secluded spot like that, they can be covered by leaves, snow, and natural debris for decades without being found.
And then there's the wildlife.
Yes. Wildlife activity is the harsh reality. The mountains are full of scavengers, bears, coyotes, mountain lions. They can scatter remains very quickly, making a positive identification impossible within weeks.
So a body doesn't stay in one place.
No. Bones get moved, clothing gets torn and carried off. A person quickly stops looking like a person.
Right.
And then you have the geology itself.
Rock slides, avalanches.
Exactly. You've got massive snowpack every winter. The freeze-thaw cycles, rock slides, and spring snowmelt can bury things deep or sweep them into crevices and canyons that are completely inaccessible. A search team could walk 10 feet away from a body and never know it.
And the fourth factor is just the sheer scale of it all.
It's a logistical nightmare. The search area is vast, and the terrain is so dense that even in 1988, they can only cover a tiny fraction of it effectively. Without a starting point, a last seen location, you're looking for a needle in 1,000 haystacks.
The sources bring up other cases in Colorado that seem to follow this pattern. It's not just Keith. People go into the wilderness and just blink out of existence.
And that's really crucial context. You see this theme of sudden decisions or incapacitation leading to total erasure again and again. You look at the case of John Francis Lenihan. His rental car was found abandoned on Highway 103, right there in Clear Creek County, a sudden walk-off into a remote, high-altitude area.
Or Keith Lee at
A
breakfast.
similar pattern, a more dramatic scene. His Camaro was found damaged and abandoned. But the point is the same. An immediate break from their vehicle, from communication, in a remote place, leading to the same result as Keith Reinhard.
The environment takes the person, but it doesn't give back an explanation.
Exactly. Or consider Walter Ido Okamoto. He closed his bank account, gave his car away, sent a letter saying he was going on his last hike in the woods. He was never found.
So the motivation can be different. Suicide, accident, foul play, a planned escape. But the results in the Rockies is often the same.
The mountain doesn't care why you're there. It becomes the ultimate silent grave. It conceals every narrative equally.
We've talked about the environment and the theories, but we have to come back to the moral weight of that search effort. The death of the pilot, the injury to the spotter, that's not just a footnote. It's a central tragedy in this case.
It changes the entire moral calculus. The community, the authorities, they didn't just pour time and money into this. They paid the ultimate price. A dedicated rescuer died trying to find a man who, we have to consider, might have deliberately staged the whole thing.
That has to create such an agonizing emotional reality for the people of Silver Plume and for the sheriff's office.
It creates this tremendous burden of guilt and sorrow. And it raises a difficult question. Does the tragic cost of that first search, the pilot's death, create a sort of unspoken barrier, a reluctance to push for new searches years later?
It's a trauma that goes way beyond a typical cold case. It almost gives the case a dark karma. Why would we risk more resources, more lives, for a man who might have caused that first tragedy?
That feeling of moral exhaustion is powerful. It means the case settles into its cold status with this heavy, sorrowful finality. It's not just that it's difficult to solve, it's emotionally poisoned. The search itself may have guaranteed that Keith's secret stays a secret forever.
And so, what's the legacy of all this uncertainty for his family, for his wife, and especially for his son Kai, who keeps pushing the foul play theory?
The sources just paint this painful picture of perpetual ambiguity. When a family is left with nothing concrete, no body, no note, just these conflicting clues, the manuscript pointing one way, the son's theory pointing another, the lack of gear pointing a third way, there's just no closure.
They're trapped. They can't mourn a death, but they can't accept an escape either. The official status is missing, but the emotional reality for them is this philosophical black hole. Was he killed? Did he fall? Or did he just walk away and leave them with decades of unanswered grief?
The mountain holds the secret, and that silence is the ultimate cruelty. Keith Reinhardt's story becomes this profound reflection on our need to create narratives and what happens when the narrative you create for yourself just takes over and leaves an ending that is absolute, unknowable, and just devastating for everyone left behind.
It's so striking, that dual nature of the wilderness here. Keith went there seeking regeneration, a creative sabbatical, a spiritual renewal.
And yet that same wilderness became his final silent mystery. It offered him the potential for the refuge he was looking for, but in doing so, it guaranteed that his final impulse, whether it was an artistic act, a fatal mistake, or a violent confrontation, would be permanently hidden. The mountain was both his inspiration and the eraser of his identity.
You're left wondering if he succeeded in writing the ending for Guy Connor, or if the mountain just took another unprepared hiker and the literary details are just a tragic, elaborate coincidence. This has been a really fascinating and layered examination.
Thank you. It's a case that reminds you how hard it is to ever know the real truth versus the story we tell ourselves about it.
And thank you, the listener, for examining the threads of this intensely personal and perplexing case with us. We encourage you to reflect on how much we can truly know about the final impulses of those seeking refuge or meaning in wild places, especially when their inner world provided a script for their disappearance. Next time on Threads of Truth, we examine the disappearance of a young woman, Lauren Thompson, whose vanishing left behind fragmented clues and agonizingly unanswered questions. We'll explore those pieces of evidence and the various scenarios surrounding her case. Until then, keep questioning the narrative.